Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's weekly ACSS Sanctions and Export Control broadcast. It's the 6th of March, and today we will discuss Sanctions and Export Controls updates that we've seen last week, which started on 27th of February. Let's see if I can present. Before I go through today's updates, I just wanted to briefly share with you that ACSS is organizing a European conference on global sanctions and export controls in Amsterdam on the 11th and 12th of May. So please visit our website for more. Hey. These are the from last week, which I wanted to share with you today, discuss with you today, which I thought were the most interesting updates. The EU dual-use goods list update. We will go through the update and just briefly mention which goods have been updated, and then we will move on to the OFAC guidance, supplementary guidance on humanitarian assistance, then discuss the OFAC settlement case with an Indian-based tobacco producer, GPI. The Department of Justice, Commerce, and Commerce BIS published a compliance note on Russia sanctions evasion. The Department of Justice announced that 2 people have been arrested in the US for illegal exports to Russia. And last but not least, I came across a really nice article with statistics on China sanctions. And I wanted to share some graphs with you about China sanctions by the numbers. So let's begin. Last week, the European Commission adopted a delegated regulation updating the EU dual-use export control list and Annex 1 to Regulation 2021/821, the dual-use regulation, in order to bring it in line with the decisions taken in the Australia Group, the multilateral export control regime in charge of preventing the proliferation of chemical and biological items. This update adds some emerging technologies in the biological sector to the EU dual-use list. In particular, the EU updated the control list, which now includes 4 new entries for marine toxins, namely brevetoxins, goniotoxins, nodularins, and polytoxin, which are naturally present in marine environments but can also be synthesized and used for biological weapons. Other changes made to the list mostly were removals and changes of references and editorial changes. Let's move on to the first update from OFAC from last week. OFAC issued the 2023 supplementary fact sheet to provide guidance on the reach of economic sanctions for persons involved in the conduct of humanitarian-related activities, including the US government, international organizations and entities, non-governmental organizations, persons involved in the provision of food, other agricultural commodities, medicine, and medical devices, and financial institutions and other service providers who support or facilitate transactions for such persons. This supplementary guidance was issued following the publication of the December 2022 general licenses, which amended over 30 sanctions programs last December. NGOs may provide humanitarian assistance in environments that are affected by targeted sanctions programs, including Nicaragua, Iraq, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen, among others, without the need for a license from OFAC, as long as they are not transacting with blocked persons, including those listed on OFAC's SDN list. So please visit this new guidance document if you are dealing with humanitarian assistance to certain sanctioned countries. Our next OFAC update is about the settlement agreement between OFAC and Godfrey Phillips India. OFAC last week announced a $332,500 settlement with Godfrey Phillips India Limited, or GPI. GPI, a Mumbai, India-registered tobacco company, has agreed to settle the potential civil liability for 5 apparent violations of the North Korea sanctions regulations. Interestingly, there are actually no UN sanctions prohibiting the export of tobacco to North Korea. In May 2022, China and Russia vetoed a UN resolution that proposed banning tobacco and all exports to North Korea, whose leader Kim Jong-un is a chain smoker. But GPI used US correspondent banks that processed payments, as well as the foreign branch of a US bank, to export financial services to or otherwise facilitate the exportation of tobacco to North Korea. Accordingly, GPI appears to have violated the North Korea sanctions regulations when it caused US banks to apparently violate a couple of paragraphs of the North Korea sanctions regulations. Moving on. Also last week, the Departments of Justice, Commerce, and Treasury together issued a joint compliance note on Russia-related sanctions evasion and export controls. The compliance note highlights one of the most common tactics used to evade Russia-related sanctions and export controls, namely the use of third-party intermediaries and transshipment points to circumvent restrictions, disguise the involvement of specifically designated nationals, SDNs, or parties on the entity list in transactions, and obscure the true identities of end users. The note provides warning signs on what to look for if a company suspects that a customer is using a third-party intermediary to evade sanctions or export controls, as well as recent examples of tactics allegedly used by the defendants to evade sanctions detection while attempting to flout the controls. So please visit the update to download this compliance note. Last but not least, from the US, something I found today, the Department of Justice published an update or a news alert. 2 Kansas men were arrested on Friday on charges related to a years-long scheme to circumvent US export controls that included the illegal export of aviation-related technology to Russia after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to the indictment, the 2 persons owned and operated a company called Conrus Trading Company, which supplied Western avionics equipment to Russian companies and provided repair services for equipment used in Russian-manufactured aircraft. Since 2020, export control laws by concealing and misstating the true end users, value, and end destinations of their exports, and by transshipping items through third-party countries. For example, between November 2020 and February 2021, the defendants received avionics equipment, including a computer identifying Russia's Federal Security Services, FSB, from a Russian company for repair in the United States. The defendants concealed the true end user and end destination by providing a fraudulent invoice to the shipment company, identifying the end destination as Germany. Very interesting case of Russia export control evasion, just like highlighted in the compliance note published on the same day. Last but not least, I have found a really nice report by the Center for New American Security, which is a Washington, D.C. based think tank established in 2007, and just wanted to show you a couple of graphs that were included in this report. Basically, this report highlighted China sanctions by the numbers. The United States has progressively expanded the scope of sanctions and entity-based export controls on Chinese persons, primarily through the specially designated nationals and blocked persons SDN list, the non-SDN Chinese Military Industrial Complex list, or CMIC, and the entity list. Each of these programs is based on a different set of legal authorities and policy rationales, but all have experienced growth in recent years as the US expands its toolkit of economic restrictions to address national security and foreign policy concerns. On the first graph, here you can see the number of designations of Chinese persons has grown significantly over the past 4 administrations. As you can see here, they went back to the first Bush administration up to today's administration under President Biden. As you can see, the SDN entity list and the Chinese military industrial complex lists have grown very strongly under the Trump administration and are still growing under the Biden administration. Let's move on to the next graph. The number of programs used to sanction Chinese persons has also grown over the past 4 administrations. For example, as you can see on the top 2 graphs, under the Bush administrations, Chinese persons have primarily been designated under the Iraq sanctions programs and the weapons of mass destruction programs, also the narcotics trafficking programs. Under the Obama administration, more sanctions programs have been used to sanction Chinese nationals and entities. And even more so under the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And last but not least, an overview of SDN list sanctions on Chinese persons by the type of program. A majority of SDN designations of Chinese persons target them from providing material aid to sanctioned countries like Iran or for contributing to nuclear proliferation. As you can see on this graph, we can see that over 120 designations of Chinese persons have been actually made under sanctions programs targeting Iran and weapons of mass destruction proliferation. Just to give you an idea that when we look at statistics and we see how many Chinese persons have been actually sanctioned by the US, by OFAC, it is not always the Chinese sanctions programs that are being used to list those persons, but also other sanctions programs, as we can see here, Iran and weapons of mass destruction proliferation. Also, North Korea is very big, and narcotics trafficking, human rights. This was today's update. I hope you enjoyed the update. I hope there were a couple of things that were interesting to you. And please let me know if I missed anything important, which we can include next Monday. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we have a Global Sanctions and Export Controls Conference coming up in Amsterdam in May, on the 11th and 12th of May. So please visit our website to register for our European conference and hope to see you there in person. Last but not least, for those of you who are ACSS members and also those of you who are not ACSS members, we have a couple of webinars coming up. Actually, on Thursday, which is not shown here, we have a webinar with Polestar on US secondary sanctions, which is free for everybody. So if you would like to learn more about US secondary sanctions, please visit our website and register for free for the webinar on Thursday. We also have a webinar on the 6th of April entitled Sanctions Risks for the Insurance Industry. On the 20th of April, Preventing and Detecting Circumvention of EU Trade Restrictions via Third Countries. And on the 18th of May, another webinar with Polestar entitled Maritime Trade Sanctions Compliance, Facts versus Fiction, which will also be for free. Thank you for your attention today and hope to see you again next Monday or during one of our webinars as next Thursday.